Hey everyone, it's Kaitlin. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video where I'm taking you through my basic stalogy, which I've been using since January as my 2020 bullet journal. I finished this guide back in September and I thought it'd be fun to take you through a bunch of the spreads that I made along the way. I really love using a stalogy because I like to put covers on it, so here are a couple that I use throughout the year. Collecting covers is kind of one of my hobbies, so that's why I have quite a few of them, but in case you were curious, these are the ones that I went through. Now this is not a regular flip through video. I've decided to reformat it a bit, and instead of going through the entire notebook, I'm going to be going through different parts of my journal so you guys can see the evolution. So I'm going to start with my yearly setup, then go into my monthly logs, my weekly and daily logs, and then finally my collections. So hopefully you guys can get an idea of how my journal's changed, because I feel like a bullet journal is never a static thing. It's always going to change and morph according to your life, and that's what I hope to show you here, along with a bunch of cool spreads, of course. Alright, so starting out with my yearly setup, in January, this is the setup that I created at the beginning of my journal. I made a couple of the more typical spreads, like my contact page, then I followed it with an index, and then I also made a yearly calendar, which was a great addition despite being tedious to make, my future log, and then a bunch of spreads that I really didn't use, to be honest. I'm pretty sure this happened because I was focused on creating a bunch of cool spreads that were unique for the front of my journal, but I've realized now that the spreads I need at the beginning of my journal are those spreads that I reference a lot. That's kind of one thing I learned after going through this journal. The front spreads are not always the most interesting, but they are usually the most useful. Okay, so here's where I think this format will be really interesting for you guys, because now I'm going to go through all of my monthly setups in sequence so you can see all of the changes that took place. At the beginning of the year, I was really focused on making a more minimalist and floral theme in my journal. I had this idea that I would make a different floral illustration for every month, and that would be my way to change things up while still keeping it reasonable, but as you'll see later, that didn't really happen. But one thing that was really consistent in my journal, despite the floral theme eventually leaving, was that I set up a vertical calendar for every single month in this journal. And I also made a tasks and notes page and a habit tracker, actually, which is kind of interesting. I also made 2 monthly setups in February. This was because when I finished my first setup, I got really overwhelmed with how much detail there was. So I tried to make a more simple setup, but then just ended up using the more decorative one anyway. So not really sure what that accomplished, but that is what happened. And part of bullet journaling is making mistakes. So that was definitely a big one on my part because it used up like 10 of my pages, which was kind of unfortunate. But hey, we move on. I think actually April was the last month that I did a floral theme, and after that I just kind of got sick of trying to think of a different floral every month. For me, drawing isn't really something that really makes me happy in my journal. For me, that really lies with calligraphy, and that's kind of my way of expressing myself in my journal creatively. So I just decided to pare it down in May and just focus on my calligraphy, doing black and white pen-only spreads, because that was something I had really wanted to do for a while. And I've actually been doing that ever since, and it's been working really, really well. June was actually one of the first iterations of the monthly calendar spread that you guys see a lot now, even in my previous setup, which was my November bullet journal setup. And it hasn't really changed too much, but the tasks, notes page, and habit trackers have definitely still evolved, which is really interesting. At first, I tracked a lot of habits, if you saw on that page, but I started to pare them down a lot more as I got into habit tracking because I realized it was a lot of work to keep up with all of those habits. Now, August was the first month that I made a monthly cover page. This is probably one of my favorite quotes I've ever done to this day, and it says, Be still like a mountain and flow like a great river, and that was said by Lao Tzu, and I still really, really love that quote, and I love the reminder that it gives me every time I open my journal. This was actually the first month I did a memory spread as well. This is how it looked. It's all calligraphy, as you can see, so no surprise that I really enjoyed doing it, and it was actually pretty easy to put together, which was nice. These spreads now that you see in September are definitely the most similar to what I do in my journal now. However, in November, if you guys were along with me for that plan with me, you would know that I did another revamp of my monthly setup, which I think is my favorite setup yet. Now, when it comes to my weekly and daily logs, these have also had quite a bit of change, but also some parts of them have stayed very, very similar. At the beginning of the year, in January and February, you can see a lot more of these weekly logs that had a 2-page spread that were then followed by my daily logs. And I found that these were really helpful when I was pre-pandemic, but once the pandemic hit and we weren't really leaving the house as much and we didn't have as many things to do in the day, I didn't really have a need for those huge 2-page spreads. And I think it was in about April I really condensed them down. I think actually you can see in one of the spreads I show here the exact date that the pandemic hit for us in Canada and I had to stop going to in-person lectures. I think it's right there. Yes, Friday the 13th. How fitting. So that was the day that we actually stopped doing in-person lectures. This is actually one of my favorite, most decorative spreads I did in my journal, that one in March. And then directly after that, in April, I cut down on the 2-page weekly and just started doing my daily logs with a 1-page weekly brain dump checklist at the beginning. Of course, I also experimented with a bunch of weekly spreads. I had a lot of fun coming up with this rolling weekly spread, which kind of changed a little bit throughout the couple months. I actually condensed Saturday and Sunday into one column later on in the year, which you'll see. But one thing that really didn't change that much was my daily logging throughout the entire journal, actually. I personally believe that daily logging is one of those fundamental steps in the bullet journal process, and it's something that really made me fall in love with the process and something that really clicked for me and worked for me. So that is why you will always see me doing daily logs, except for this week where I did a 1-page weekly because I was taking the week off and I didn't want to make myself a bunch of daily logs because then I knew I would start giving myself work to do. But besides weeks when I tried to force myself into not doing work, I liked doing the daily logs because they were really flexible. I also made a couple customizations to my daily log. Here you can see I did a time ladder, which was really helpful for class, and I also did some habit trackers, which was cool. I always love seeing what collections I've made whenever I flip through my old journal. Some of them are a lot more used, like this project spread and my grid spacing cheat sheet, and those ones are usually recreated in the next journal, which if you watched my setup, you would have seen those were made, but some of them are just random notes that I jot down and then I use it, and then I don't really need to use it again, but it's kind of fun to look back on and see what I was taking notes on at the time. So in case you were curious what kind of notes I take, here they are. Usually my rule for note taking is I will just put them in between wherever. I'm not really too fussed about having all my daily logs in one section and then other logs in another section. I will literally go from a daily log right onto a notes page, and that doesn't bother me at all. Oh, and I also made a reading note here from the book The Places That Scare You, which I really enjoyed reading. And here's another key one. I made my semester due date overview. Here's the most fun notes page I made. This is my washi tape collection. This is the first and last time I will ever do a Dutch door nostalgy. Just putting that out there, but no regrets. It came out really cool, and that's kind of all that matters to me. And then finally, with the new bullet journal setup collection, that kind of comes to the end of my journal. Thank you so much for watching if you're still hanging out with me. I hope you found this video helpful, inspiring, or even mildly entertaining, and I will see you guys in my next video on Friday.